Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. I want to welcome you here to talk about dispatch automation. Today I have Karl Bickmore joining us here to host this webinar with me. Karl here is the CEO of Raven Automation, and my name is Jared Brantley. I am the Chief Automation Officer here at Raven. Karl, you have anything you'd like to add before we get started?
I'm excited. It's a great topic and looking forward to seeing some of the magic you and your team come up with here, things that we've been using and talking about for a while. It's a great topic.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Here we're going to talk a little bit more about the business side of dispatch, but we're really going to dedicate some time to diving into more of the technical aspects. And we've got one of our dispatch processes that we've developed for one of our partners here that's going to cover some of the AI functionality um, and feature some of the different things that we've done. So I'm really excited to show some of that off and explain a little bit more about what our team has put together. But before we get there, let's talk about what kind of processes that MSPs commonly use for dispatch today. The two things that we hear most often are, a centralized dispatcher model. This is something that's really common amongst larger MSPs, or what we would call a self-dispatch model amongst some of the smaller organizations. The big differences here is in that centralized model, you typically have dedicated dispatchers. And those resources are constantly watching tickets come in. They're reviewing things. They are making sure that you have tickets prioritized accordingly. Whenever possible, they're classifying tickets with either categories or types and subtypes, depending on your PSA. They're going to look and manage calendars for your resources and assign those different tickets to resources. For the longest time, this was widely considered the best practice for dispatching and was really the most efficient means of dispatching tickets, again, especially for those larger organizations where you really want to maximize the billable time for each one of your technical resources.
It's interesting how that has developed for some of us in different ways. Of course, in a longstanding MSP, I'm also involved with, and other MSPs I've seen out there. You kind of struggle this because you kind of want the best of both worlds, but it's kind of difficult. Typically, when you have that centralized dispatcher model, it's a non-technical person, and so you spend time helping them learn to interpret tickets and to categorize them correctly and to triage them, right? And then, of course, the benefit of having like a technical self dispatch is they're going to eye it better. They're going to better understand what it is. The downside is that then who really owns it, and really is it a great use of a technician's time doing some of that administrative work, and versus just always on. And I would say is like I've seen the ticket counts get higher and more tickets coming in on a daily basis. I've seen some people go to some interesting team-based models where you have multiple dispatchers doing centralized, or you have a technical team that does initial triage that dispatches as well. It essentially handles a central dispatch role, but they are somewhat technical, oftentimes even entry level technical, but more capable of being able to understand what's going on the ticket. So these are just the interesting variations we've seen that are pretty common. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. So to that point on the self-dispatch model, oftentimes that classification and prioritization through the triage process is better when the tech is doing it because they do tend to understand the issues that are going on. But the downside of that is your technicians often cost you more than your dispatchers do. So as a result, that does tend to be the highest cost means of handling dispatch, and it does tend to have a diminished productivity for your technical resources.
Right.
And for someone like me coming from a technical background, I can honestly say I was awful at managing a calendar and handling the administrative side of stuff.
Jared, I've never heard this before. What's going on here?
Take that stuff away from me. I was always best when I was working tickets and handling
Right.
those technical issues. So, getting to a centralized model over that self-dispatch role is really great in terms of getting your techs doing the things that they're best at. Now, of course, that's a generalization. Not everybody is as awful as I am when it comes to managing some of those administrative sides of things. Some people are great at it. I'm just not one of them. So,
Well, there's no doubt there's some roteness to it. There's some routine to it. There's some predictability
mhm,
to it. That's why this is an area we're talking about because in either version, there's administrivia that can be
mhm,
reduced, and everybody's
right,
going to appreciate that.
right. So I had three of our partners earlier this week that were kind enough to share some actual data with us. So understanding the cost of dispatching. Specifically, we tried to target some of our MSP partners that were at various sizes. So when you look at this, you can clearly see that for what I would consider to be um, a smaller to medium MSP for MSP A, based on their cost for dispatching, where they have a mix of dispatchers and techs handling that role, you can see that their dispatch cost per hour is a lot higher than some of our others that are out there. But it costs them around $110 a day on average for dispatching, or $2,300 a month. Now, if you move to MSPB, which is a much larger MSP and is much larger than the average MSP, quite honestly, they have a centralized dispatcher. They're right in range at about $26 an hour for that centralized dispatcher. They estimate that it's about a 5-minute process to dispatch a ticket. So it's a little over $2 per ticket to dispatch that ticket. They're spending $3,200 a month to dispatch. Now let's jump over to one of the really big MSPs,
I just,
8,500
but
endpoints.
before we do this, I just got to say something real quick. So if you are looking at this and you never thought about the cost of dispatch beyond like that's that person's salary, but what it costs per client per ticket, that's some pretty great information and it's probably a little bit shocking. I would just imagine. So that I think
Mhm.
it's worth really considering. Sorry, I just love
No,
that's what I love about you, Jared. I love about the way you look at the data. I love the way you look at the cost and you pull it up objectively. It's hard to argue with, you know.
yeah, I mean, without a doubt. But looking at MSPC there at 8,500 endpoints and 16.6 million in annual revenue, you know, what's quite impressive there is they're only getting an average of 125 tickets a day. So I would really like to understand what they're doing to keep their ticket volume so low. That's really impressive.
Clearly
But
they're winning in other ways by keeping count
absolutely,
low. Yeah, totally. Good point.
absolutely. But in terms of dispatch, almost $6,000 a month just for dispatching tickets. So obviously there's quite a good deal of cost that you can see there just from, going through these processes. So let's talk about the client experience. This is really what matters the most. And dispatching and triaging tickets is the first step in the client experience process. So we always want to make sure that we're removing friction points wherever possible. So talking through some of that, one of the challenges that you have with self-dispatch, I've seen this time and time again in previous MSPs that I personally worked for. Technicians would cherry pick tickets. So what would happen? You'd get tickets that would come in. They're not really paying attention necessarily to when tickets come in or what the priorities are. They're picking the things that are easy to do or the tickets that look interesting to them or the clients that they like or the people that they like. And they're leaving the difficult clients or the things that they don't like for other people to deal with. And that's obviously creating a negative client experience from the right on the onset of the ticket process.
I think there's another psychological factor that's always going into it. So I think sometimes you can attribute, like intent, like, hey, they're, that one's not their favorite. I think though that the psychology of a big list, anytime a list is over 5 or 7, and it's really common, any technician is going to have more than that many tickets on their table that they got to look at, right? Anytime a list gets over a certain size, you end up starting thinking, how can I shorten the list? And you just end up picking the quickest, easiest ones,
Absolutely.
which is that's just psychologically true. Any of us, our own to-do lists that we operate in our life, that's how we do it. Once it gets to a certain size, our primary goal suddenly becomes how quickly can I reduce the size of this list?
Right.
And the other thing about that big list is the anxiety piece. And this is where it gets in the head. I used to really struggle to understand this. the psychology of the technician, because I'm like, well, nobody's working like more than 40 hours a week. They're just doing a regular schedule. They come and go at their time, and that works fine. But they constantly, I'm so stressed, and I'm just like, part of it's the anxiety of the list that's at them, right? Sometimes it's like, a negative customer interaction, or there's a problem they just don't know what to do. But I would say the anxiety of the list is what gets them, and having it uncategorized or undealt with or unplanned, that's a big psychological factor in the technician's daily life. But so like, even if you give the generous assumption that they're not just cherry picking in that way, they're still going to go and grab the quickest, easiest ones first, and not deal with in order or by priority, which is what you really want, is the in
Right.
order by priority, right?
Right. And this is another situation where, as a former service manager, your metrics can actually work against you, especially if
Yes,
you're rewarding people for having the highest numbers of closed tickets in a given time period. That
it's a great
further
reason for the cherry
encourages
picking. Yeah, yeah,
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the other thing when it comes to manual dispatching is you're dealing with people, and people
yeah,
think about things in different ways, so they're going to
yeah,
interpret issues differently. That's going to result in tickets that might be prioritized by one resource entirely different than another person, or a
yeah.
classification of tickets could be entirely different. So that creates some data inaccuracies when you go back and look at reporting and things of that nature. You might see missed SLAs due to things like human error, or maybe a dispatcher gets up to grab some coffee or goes to the restroom or takes lunch and somebody's just not paying attention. Maybe they just have an off day. So you have those kinds of situations. Yeah, and that leads to the next point. When anytime that dispatcher has vacation or worse, calls in sick, again, as a former service manager, I would have to scramble to find coverage, which more than often
Yeah,
meant
usually you're doing it. That's right.
exactly,
Yeah, right,
exactly, which means everything else that I had to do that day just did not get done, period.
right.
So certainly a challenge there. And of course, yeah, that human error would lead to things like untouched tickets, tickets needing to be worked more than once, confusion in figuring out why a ticket was assigned the way it was, or incorrectly categorized, things of that nature. It leads to items just not simply not getting touched when they should be.
Well, and this all leads to a compounding effect of a crappy day for your technician and not a good response to the customer. Both things you don't want.
Absolutely. So let's look at what happens when you can leverage things like AI to handle some of the triage and classification process. So first, the immediate benefit is if you're using AI to do this, you're going to get consistent results. You'll get consistently prioritized tickets, and you can leverage that based on sentiment analysis for the tone of the message, as well as the details inside of the ticket notes themselves. Two, you can use those AI prompts to create consistent classification models based on your list of categories or subtypes or types and subtypes. Uh, so that will ensure that all of those categorizations are handled consistently. In some cases, you could take it a step further with other tools like Thread, and you can call workflows immediately once that ticket comes in to solve that issue. And you have a potential to remove the human element entirely. So you can have near immediate resolution of an issue. And of course, that's going to do wonders for your client experience and your SLAs.
100%. So, I mean, this seems like an obvious win and not actually among the more complicated things to do. You just got to
Mhm.
know how to put the tool process together and have a little experience with the data, right?
Absolutely. And I mentioned Thread a moment ago, so you can build those kinds of things in Roost and you can leverage various AI tools to do it. Our team has used things like Microsoft Azure OpenAI. We've used the public OpenAI instance. We've used Hats AI, which is a relatively new tool that's out there. But again, if you're using products like Thread, you don't have to build your own workflows for that. That's a feature baked into the product to handle the classification and prioritization.
Yeah, there's
So
no doubt
there's
we're a
lots of
big
ways
fan
you
of
can
that.
accomplish that.
Yeah, there's no doubt we're a big fan of that product. We think that those guys are doing some really terrific work. It fits very nice into the flow. of other automations, as well as becomes an endpoint for conversation for the customer. So there's some big wins with that product, and I'm a huge fan of working with somebody you can rely on to drive a solution, so that you don't have to keep cobbling together your own, DIY system. Somebody who's thinking about that all day, every day, there's a huge benefit to that.
Yep, without a doubt. So moving into the dispatch side of this, because personally I see triage as one process and dispatch as another. On
Yes,
the
yes.
dispatch side of this, you can use the Roost workflows essentially to identify resources that are available on your service team. Of course, if you're, let's talk ConnectWise PSA for a second. If you're leveraging the in-out board, you can also leverage that to include resources that are not in the office. So that way you're not scheduling those resources for tickets. But basically the way this works is after you've identified the resources on your service team, you find the resource with the lowest number of assigned tickets, you assign the ticket to the resource. In many cases, depending on your individual configuration, we can even make these kinds of processes SLA aware so that we're not necessarily assigning a ticket to a resource that has other tickets that are about to breach SLA.
Yeah, this is the stuff. This is the magic that when you get this consistent, now you don't have dispatchers just making mistakes because the amount of data that's in front of them, or just they didn't pay attention, or they just missed that.
Mhm.
And that's where this gets really, really awesome.
Yeah, we're working with another partner right now that has an on-premise instance of ConnectWise PSA, and we've actually built a dispatch process for them, but we've also built a redispatch process so that as tickets are approaching their SLA, if they haven't been worked, there's a trigger in the database that flags that ticket for redispatch so that we can find someone else to work that ticket so it doesn't breach SLA.
Yeah, I think a key point here, though, to probably talk about in this is that we're providing all these tools, we're making better decisions quicker and easier, but we're not taking the personal touch out of it. We're not removing a person seeing this in every way,
Mhm.
always, but we're making it so much quicker and easier for them to make good decisions, or for people to be able to know what they should do next.
Absolutely. So some of the benefits, we've already started to talk about this, but some of the benefits here, one, speed of response, right? Triage, classify, and dispatch tickets in less than an average of 2 minutes. If we go back and look at some of those manual processes, we were seeing MSPs tell us 3 minutes to triage and dispatch, 4 minutes to triage and dispatch, 5 minutes, but that required someone to physically be in their chair watching those tickets come in order to make that happen. In
Yeah.
this case, this is happening just right off the bat through automation, and it's picking them up immediately.
Well, and this goes to their point about like the consistency and the always on nature of it, because that's the key. Is like when I bet a lot of us can relate to this. Is not only do we have days where it's just a busy day because some event or some system thing happened, but it feels like we never have the entire team there, right? There's always somebody that needed to take the day off, or somebody's on vacation, or something's happening, and not being able to pay attention to that, or heaven forbid, that's your actual dispatch team, as we've been talking about. It's just, maybe when everybody's all there, the load happens and it works and people get on it and they're okay. The problem is you constantly have this state where somebody's off, or somebody's got an appointment, or somebody's working from
Mhm.
home, and that's where everything falls through the cracks. And so just you just can't say enough about the benefit of having this critical initial task done in a very timely manner, always,
Mhm.
and regardless of these other elements. Because I just feel like there's never a day that everybody's there, and
Right.
it messes with it. It's constant needs, right? So.
Yeah, without a doubt, So you already touched on the consistency aspect and the fact that it's always on. You never have to give the automation PTO or sick days or anything like that.
Right.
But the cost savings, so we touched a little bit about what it costs to dispatch manually. These kinds of automations can typically be implemented in an average of 6 to 8 hours. Now, obviously, it depends on the complexity of your process and additional features or functionality that you need.
Well,
But
even if it was double or triple that, it would still hit an ROI
sure,
really quick. Yeah.
but the basic functionality can typically be implemented in 6 to 8 hours. That usually for your average MSP pays for itself within a 1 month of implementation. There are very few things out there where you're going to recover your cost in the first month of usage.
Well, and I would add to that, it's not only is it important about recovering the cost, but it's about scalability. It makes me
Mhm.
think I can add more customers, and I don't have dispatch problems piling up because I got all these new customers tickets coming in all of a sudden. It's a huge advantage to the scalability and just the stability of feeling like you got to keep moving forward and not have to keep rebuilding the team as you go
Right,
when you come to some of these things.
right. And again, going back to the ConnectWise PSA world for a second, there's a feature of the PSA that is extremely underutilized, and it's called the skills matrix. It's a great concept in theory, but no
Yeah.
MSP that I'm aware of really works to keep up with this. But the idea is you can track the skills that your technicians have inside of the PSA. The intent was that your dispatchers could use this matrix to assign those tickets with the concept of skill-based routing. Well, if you keep a skills matrix up to date, the AI can read from the skills matrix and handle skill-based routing for you. So the benefit that you can get with that is an improved first touch resolution rate, which is of course a major hit to client satisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Anytime
a
we can
huge
resolve
thing.
an issue on the first attempt, yeah, that's always going to be a positive experience for your client.
It's so funny you bring that up because I remember, I think in my organization, when I first was becoming an MSP and buying tools and getting PSA and ticketing and all that going, I think it was 2008, 2009. And I remember the skills based thing back then. It's like it's an idea from the 2010s or whatever.
Hmm.
But in my opinion, is not ever been practical until we can find ways to automate the use of it. People never bothered. The interface is too crappy. It didn't make sense. It
Absolutely.
wasn't easy. Having
Absolutely.
AI read a data set though is easy. That's doable, right? So
Right.
um, because actually
You
doing
know,
that, using that functionality is more struggle than it's worth. So
hmm without a
when
doubt.
a person looking and clicking. So
Yeah, and even if you have a PSA that doesn't have these kinds of features, it's not too difficult to build your own skills matrix.
right.
And we can, of course,
Well,
incorporate something like that.
yeah, skills-based routing is a great idea, and it is all about the data, right? So,
Hmm.
like the ConnectWise PSA has a place where we can leverage it, but if not, you can find another place. There is the bigger question about how do you get the data in there and maintain it regularly.
Of
That's
course.
a good question as well. But once it's built, it can put a little magic into your dispatch.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move into the fun stuff, the technical side.
Oh, nerd time, nerdery.
That's
Taking the
right.
propeller hat on
So
here. So,
yeah, so first and foremost, this is the start of the core dispatch process. Now, in this, we've incorporated dispatch and triage into a single process, and there's a lot of sub workflows here. And of course, you can't really read what this is on the screen. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple of things, and we'll kind of touch on this at a high level as we go through. But of course, the first thing that we're going to do is create a ticket trigger. So in this case, we're going to launch this workflow anytime a ticket record is saved. Now, of course, that's going to include things like tickets have been updated and things of that nature. So it's important that we make sure that we go in and we add some conditional filtering here. So in this case, we're making sure that we're only going to trigger on this if the ticket action has been added. So it's a newly created ticket. And in this case, it's on our triage board. We're not looking at tickets that are on other boards. So it has to have been created on our triage board.
no, and this is an example of where you say 6 to 8 hours, or the complexity can be different, right? Maybe
Mhm.
you don't have a triage
Absolutely.
board. If you don't have a triage board, that makes it hard to do this approach, right? And so, would you? change the setup of your board system in order to make this work? Or should it be
Maybe.
adapted to your existing? Those are the questions. That's where the consultation and the time building it makes
Right.
sense.
Well, and before we implement anything like this in anyone's environment, the first thing that we're going to do is have a meeting with that partner, and we're
Yeah,
going to discuss the needs and kind of talk about the objectives for success and understand what their process looks like, because no process is a one size fits all.
right,
Every MSP handles things, while we all have similar processes, things are handled differently, you know.
right. Yeah, we have similar things we're looking to accomplish, but we might go about it differently. And we start having different team members and different geographies, and like some of us are multi-location, some of us are not, and so that plays into all these things, right? So,
Well, it's a good thing you brought up geography because that's actually the next thing that we look at. So in this case, we have a get company action. And the first thing that we're looking for with this is a territory based filter. So we actually look for a territory name, Southwest, Central, Southeast, Northeast, or Northwest. And based on that territory, we're going to route this to a specific service team. Because in this particular instance, the partner that we built this for, they have different service teams for different territories. So they still kind of have a local feel for the clients that they're working with. So that entry level help desk is always going to have that local feel. Whereas, of course, the more senior level resources are kind of uh, global, for lack of a better term, covering all of their client base.
sure.
After we move through a process like that, of course, we set a lot of different variables, such as time zones based on where the client is, because that matters. We have some extra things that are in here, such as an escalation list for certain issues that we know are high priority that need to be routed or handled a special way. We actually have a compliance requirement in here for a certain number of clients that require certain certifications. So those team members that have that specific certification are the only ones that can work those tickets for that client. And we incorporate that a little bit later. We have functionality for exclusions. So if you have clients that should be excluded from this process, then we have that capability that's there. So after we go through that company informational piece, we're going to go into an exclusion piece where we check the exclusions. If they're excluded, cool. We end the process. We do nothing else. The ticket's there for your actual humans to look at and handle accordingly. If they're
Well,
not
and
excluded,
look, and I don't know all the use cases for it. You probably the first one comes to mind. One that I've dealt with is this is going to be a co-managed scenario where this client self-dispatches their own work with their own team, and you as the MSP has a different role, or you're looking at different areas for it. That might be one of the scenarios. Maybe you could help help us explain other reasons why something might be excluded.
yeah, you may have certain ticket types that don't need to be dispatched in a certain way. And I'll give another example as we go a little bit later in the workflow. But after we do that, we go look at business hours. Perhaps you get a voicemail that's left within business hours. Well, we certainly want to handle that. So in this case, we can see the voicemail comes from no reply at heyrosie.com. In this case, it's an AI based voicemail system. And it happens to be within business hours based on our current time and end time here. If it's outside of business hours, well, we're not going to dispatch that ticket. We're going to leave it on the triage board because no one's there to work that ticket right now. Otherwise, we're going to go through, and now we move into this next piece, the get note process. This is actually a sub workflow here. So we pass this into our AI sentiment analysis crate. So the first thing that we're doing here is now we're jumping in, we're running through and getting the actual ticket note. And this supports multiple PSAs. So we've got support in here for Halo, Datto, Kaseya, ConnectWise. So based on your PSA, we'll grab your ticket note and we are going to go through and read that ticket note. So we'll read that ticket note for processing and we will output that information from that sub workflow back into the main workflow. And of course, Wherever possible, we like to use RoboRooski to generate notes to explain exactly what each one of these sub workflows is doing. So it's really easy to go back and try to keep track of everything that's happening, which is really helpful when we want to reuse some of these components for other automations too.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the power of the RPA platform, the Roost platform, is its ability to write once and use in many ways in many places. Yeah.
For sure. So after we get the note, this is something that our team developed as a PII redactor. So if you're using something like Microsoft Azure AI, well, any information that you pass to that according to your Azure terms should remain inside of your own environment. I don't trust that personally, but that's what Microsoft tells us. So we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But what if you're not using that and you're using the public open AI? Do we want to pass email addresses and contact information and things like that? Not at all.
Right.
So our team created a PII redactor. In this case, again, it supports Autotask, ConnectWise Manage, and Halo. We've got to get the Kaseya actions built into this still. But what we do with this is we get the contact information, determine the PII data that's associated with that, and essentially we filter that information. So we have this long series of sensitive fields that we pull out, and we replace those sensitive fields with basically filters like name. And you can see there's a good deal of code that's been created in here to pull out any sensitive information using things like regex matching and things of that nature. So we're doing everything that we can to try to pull out, unique formatting for phone numbers, because some people may have parentheses around that area code. Some may not use that. So we try to account for every possible way that that could be formatted so that we can pull that out. So as a result, when we remove that, we're essentially left with a final output here of our filtered data. We truncate that and we return that back. So that flows back into our main workflow. So now what we're left with is essentially a note with redacted information for anything that's related to PII. Now, Karl, you asked about other exclusions. So it's not uncommon for us to handle things in different ways. It's not uncommon to have clients send tickets to the wrong email address. How often do we get a billing question sent to the help desk?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So in this case, we actually account for that. So if it's a billing related question, we actually look here. We've created a set of keys looking at the word invoice, invoicing, credit memo, or billing. And if that word happens to be found in the summary, or it happens to be found in our filtered response, so that ticket note, then we know it's a billing related question, and we can route that accordingly and send it over to our AR team. So in some cases, you may exclude that from dispatching because that may be handled in a different way. In other cases, you may route that to a dedicated board, and it may not get dispatched to a person. It may just get sent to a board, right? Because everyone handles back office processes differently.
Yeah, terrific. Great example.
So if it's not going to be a billing related issue and it's going to be something that we really need to process for dispatching, great. Now we're looking for service teams. So did we find the service team? In this case, this is a workflow that has to be territory aware. So we're looking to see if this particular client is assigned a service team or not, because we may have multiple service teams for those territories. If we have a service team assigned, then we're going to move down to list boards and continue the process. If we don't have a service team, then we're going to output a note and say, hey, that we don't have a service team assigned to this company. We can't dispatch this ticket. Now, again, this is a customization that was built for this one particular partner that we did this for. This situation may not apply to every MSP, right?
That's
So
terrific. I mean, like always, it feels like whenever you walk me through processes the team's put together and the sub processes and whatnot, it always feels so very thorough, and I love it.
we try, but it's one of those cases, automation is rarely ever complete, right? There's always something else that we can account for, something else that can be done. I don't know that you can ever truly prepare for every possible scenario in any process. But we
Right.
can certainly work to cover as many of those major scenarios up front and then continue to make tweaks to the process to kind of accommodate some of those other things that may come up.
Yeah, it just goes to show the experience of working with several MSPs, and as you come across the scenarios, you build a tool for it, and then you can
Right.
apply it to the next one who has the same scenario. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, getting a little off topic here, I think that's the beauty of what we do. We get to learn constantly. There's constant learning in this career field. So it's great. There's
Yeah.
never a dull moment. So,
I know that's why I like it. I maybe professional ADHD doing the same thing bores me. So I always like to have
well,
new things to learn.
I don't have professional ADHD. I have legit
Yeah,
ADHD.
actual ADHD. Ah, yes.
Uh, let's see, where was I? Yeah, so after we have checked to make sure that there's a service team assigned, now we need to list service boards. Now, again, specific scenario for this case, there are multiple service boards for each territory. So we need to list boards, and we've got something else that's kind of interesting here. We take that filtered ticket note and we pass it into an AI with all of the possible boards for that territory. And we have another sub workflow here called pass board prompt. And what we're doing with this is we are basically taking the query for that filtered message as well as the list of boards, and we are making a determination of which board this should go to based on the territory and the message. So once we get that information, we pass it back into the main workflow.
Yeah, so connect the dots like in a more real world example because you're saying it in a really great way that applies. But so this is like, hey, I need to know if it's in Phoenix, like where I'm at, and it's the sysadmin team, or it's the application support team, or
Or
it's
the security team,
the
or
security team. Yeah,
exactly.
that's the way you connect that down all the way to the, oh yeah, now I know I'm getting it to the right place.
Hmm. Absolutely. So we do that. Great. We run the simple action to change the service board now that we know where to send it. Now we run some more AI ticket categorization functions because again, your ticket types and subtypes, in this case, because we're looking at ConnectWise, uh, they're going to have different IDs based on your board structures and things like that. So we need to account for that. So now we jump into our AI-based ticket categorization process, which again, there's a lot going on here as well. So we have a sub workflow that's getting ticket variables. We have another one that's getting note information again. We have another workflow that's reaching out and getting those types and subtypes from the PSA and passing all of that back. Again, we call the PII redactor to make sure that we don't pass anything PII related back into the AI model. Um, Here, we're actually using HATS AI in this case, but we're sending a sentiment analysis query based on that ticket note so that we can determine the priority for that ticket based on the sentiment analysis. We verify our response. If our categories are identified, great, let's update our categories. If they're not, we have some handling in place to accommodate that.
Wonderful. It's funny. I feel like this as a person who doesn't get into the tool and build these myself, because I'm not the automation officer. I'm more strategic vision and other parts of our organization, and also in MSPs I've worked in before. It's like I have to admit, sometimes I feel like I'm that customer that goes and looks at a server room and sees all the blinky lights and it looks awesome, but I couldn't tell you what it all does. I love how you work through it. And then the other folks on this call who like really want the details, they're loving this, I'm sure, because it's so amazing all the various details. But I just love the thoroughness. I love all the sub automations. It's really cool. It's very powerful. I love how you're walking through it.
Yeah, we're trying to walk through it and not necessarily dive into all of the code that's here, and
Right.
trying to blend the best of both worlds a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. For me, I see lots of blinky lights and it's awesome.
So, after we have determined which categories we should have, now we run the appropriate actions to set those categories. Of course, if we have an issue, then we'll update the ticket with any issues that are related to the categorization side. If anything failed, we will update the ticket with failures. So anytime we implement something like this, before we go live in production, we don't just turn it on and let it run. What we do is we actually turn it on and have it write the changes that it would make as an internal ticket node. And we go through a validation period with the partner so that we're ensuring that any changes that would be made go as that internal note so that we can review them together and determine if that would have been the desired effect. So we kind of call that process prompt massaging, because we'll go in and make some tweaks to the prompt so that we're getting things in the desired effect, right? Because sometimes creating those AI prompts can certainly change how that stuff comes off and how those changes are made. So it certainly has an impact.
Prompt massaging, that's awesome. It makes me think you get all this done, get your prompt massaging done, get your workflow going, then you can go get a real massage.
Yeah, right. So great, you go through the categorization side of this. Now it's time to dispatch. So we have a sub workflow for that to assign a team member to the ticket. So that's what this process looks like. So as we zoom in here, so first thing we're going to do, list the team assigned to the service board. You can have multiple service teams assigned to service boards. So we need to make sure that we're targeting the right team. Now, if you recall, I mentioned that they have some specific clients that require certifications in order to work in their environment. So we actually have a workflow here called Get Members and Certifications. So once we list that service team, we're going to end up with a list of team members here. So we basically grab that list and we feed that list into this sub workflow to see if they have the certification or not. That sub workflow is just simply this right here. We query an API endpoint in ConnectWise, and we're just looking to see if they have what we're looking for. That's it, just by running get member. So we get the information that we need. We pass this in and hit the list certifications endpoint. This is it. If they have it, great, we output that they have it. If they don't, then we output that they don't. So when we go back to this assign team members to ticket part of this, my note box gets in the way. So now we review the certification to see if they have it or not. If we have a resource that has it, great. We're going to list tickets for those resources. If we don't have anyone that has that certification or doesn't meet our criteria, then we're going to update the ticket accordingly and move on. Now what we do is we list all of the tickets for those assigned resources. And in this case, we have some Jinja code here that gives us a list of members and their total number of assigned tickets. This also accounts for people that may be assigned. So you may have a ticket that have multiple resources assigned, and this is going to account for that too. So if you have a ticket with 2 resources assigned, both of those resources are going to get credit for having that ticket in their queue.
Yeah, this is great stuff.
So we go to the in out board, we see if they're in or out that day. Now we look
So,
at that Jinja evaluation for that member list. We have an SLA reassign feature here. If they're in office, great. If they're not in the office, move on. Assign the member. And now we have a sub workflow to give us the status ID, because of course status IDs are going to be different for every service board in ConnectWise. So we're going to grab the status ID. That's just a simple helper sub workflow. And in fact, we actually have a tutorial on our website that shows you how to create that sub workflow as well. So go check that out and we'll walk you through how to create one of those yourself. We'll set the
yeah, I'm going to
status on
get
the
right
ticket.
on it. No, just kidding.
Even you
Let's
can
just,
do it, Carl. It's
all right. I
pretty,
appreciate
pretty
that,
basic.
Jared. I think that's awesome. No, well, look, the folks in here that are looking to do these automations, this is gold. You're helping them out. It's awesome.
So we set the status on the ticket, we exit the sub workflow and pass back into our primary process. And if everything is successful, we'll add a ticket note showing that everything was dispatched. And that's the end of the process. Now, if we have failures along the way, you might notice we have some of these on failure transitions with check retries and then delays in place. So we've added that to account for things like API timeouts and other situations that might cause failures along the way. So you'll see that we have that when we assign the team member. We have that when we're changing boards. We have that when we're listing service boards. You'll see that we have that functionality when we get the note. Basically, anytime we're talking to ConnectWise to get any of that information that's sensitive to this process, we create some retry functionality that's in there. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's going to add so much more reliability to your automations by adding things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's just experience talking right there, right? How many times have you had to work on something and figure out it was just need a little more time?
Yeah, we absolutely see things like that all the time where your ConnectWise server has high resource utilization or it's just too busy to handle the request at that time.
Yeah.
And you rerun the workflow and it's perfectly fine. So that's it. That's what an automated triage and dispatch process looks like. Now, I'll admit, this one is one of the more complicated versions of that. But I wanted to show that off because there's a lot that you can do in this process. And this is one of the more full-featured versions of that process that accounts for a lot of different scenarios that we
Yeah,
wouldn't necessarily
multi-city,
account for.
multi-tenant, the skill set routing, all the error handling, some terrific stuff. I mean, hopefully, people looking to build their own, they're getting some really great ideas out of this. And of course, we've referred to ConnectWise, but you've noticed there's other PSAs. I mean, that's the
Of
beauty
course.
of a good platform like this is you can plug and play like Lego blocks, the components, and then accommodate for the differences as well. It's pretty powerful.
So I want to jump back for a second and go back to that cost of dispatching manually. We had MSPA at 2,300 a month, MSPB at we'll say 3,200 a month, and MSPC at almost 5,700 a month. That was their cost for dispatching. Now, if we look at the benefit of automating that, MSPA on a manual process annualized is spending $27,720 a year. If they were to automate that dispatch process, even with just kind of a simple basic dispatch process, it doesn't have to be super fancy. That cost savings for them, including an estimated AI cost, would be about 24.5 per year.
Yeah.
MSPB, 39,000 a year is what they're spending on dispatching. They could save, including an estimate for AI cost, right? AI costs are a little bit harder to estimate because most AI platforms use a tokenization model, and how they describe a token varies, right? A token could be a series of words or common phrases, or less common terms could be multiple tokens. So it's a little bit harder to calculate that cost, but with a cost estimate there, we would estimate that they'd save about $36,000 a year. And then MSPC, again, implementing a basic dispatch and triage process. They go from spending 68,000 a year to saving about 63,000 a year, including AI costs.
I mean, this is powerful because this is hard costs, money that would have gone out the door to somebody to do that task. But for me, man, the even bigger piece is the unspecified costs of workers doing boring, mundane work that doesn't feel great, or the inaccuracies that cause little goat rodeos of people like trying to figure out what the heck's going on and all the extra cycles that causes. And
Right.
then the customers that are like, you guys never get back to us, or you're always sending it to the wrong person. Because it the intangibles are immense on what the impact of a good dispatch process can do. And so to this is like real dollars out the door. And it's a great way to do it. But to me, it's way more important than even $63,000 a year. Because of just the way that it improves your employee's life and the way it improves the customer's experience, which also means customer happiness, and customer likelihood to want to continue to be excited about doing business with you, so forth, so on. And so it's the intangibles are immense here.
One more thing that I'll mention here that's actually not in the slide deck. This came from one of our other larger MSPs. They've got about 10,000 managed devices with about 20 million in annual revenue. Their dispatching process is blended. Um, he, our contact there says at peak time, it can take up to about 30 minutes to get a ticket assigned to a tech for the first time. During non-peak times, it could be 5 to 10 minutes. But we did implement some automation for them specifically on some of their security on some of their security related tickets and some of their other internal dispatch needs. And the response that we've seen for that, they say that we're seeing the average response for those tickets drop down to less than 30 seconds on that SLA. They're seeing it go from, an average of 10 minutes or so during non-peak times to sub 30 seconds to get those tickets
Yeah. How
assigned.
incredible is that? Yeah, terrific results. Yeah,
I
fantastic.
would have put that in the slide deck, but I didn't get the information until after we put this together. So
Well, that's why you got to stay to the end of the webinar to get the gold, good information.
yeah,
Hey, Jared
it's
and Carl, I know I'm just behind the scenes here, Nathan here, but I got a couple questions from our audience I want to shoot
Okay,
over
great.
your way. The first question is, with this workflow, are the MSP working tickets off of a board, or are they working off of service calls in order? Background, we found success in tracking the expected time it will take to solve a ticket rather than the number of tickets assigned to a resource. For example, a simple password reset or group modification takes longer than a DC rebuild.
Well, first to answer the question, when it comes down to are they working tickets, the tickets are still going to be on a service board. So, they're going to get those tickets assigned. It's commonly considered a best practice, again, depending on your PSA. We'll stay on the ConnectWise world because that's what we describe from a process stance, to work off of the My Calendar view. And then the tech is just working the tickets in order as they're scheduled on their calendar. But again, depending on your process, that may be different. Your techs may be working tickets from a priority level. They may be working them based on a time and date that they were submitted. So we have some flexibility in how that happens, and we kind of tailor it a little bit towards your specific MSP and the method that you need.
That's a
All
great
right,
answer.
one more
Yeah.
question here. How do you handle testing modifications and tweaks to workflows? Background, I found that in Roost and with MSP automation in general, it's not easy to separate development and production environments.
Mm.
And in
Mhm.
some cases, a development environment isn't possible. So the question again, how do you handle testing modifications and tweaks to workflows?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that we can go about doing that. The first and foremost is for a workflow like this, the first thing that we would do is have it log all of the changes as an internal ticket note. rather than actually make the changes so that you can review what would have been done. Now, if we're going to perform maintenance to this and change how it would impact these things going forward, then what I would most likely do in that scenario is make a copy of the workflow, edit the copy of the workflow, and have the copy write the changes as an internal note so that we would go back through that validation process again. And if we're satisfied with that copy and the changes that it's making, then we would go back and update the production workflow with those changes. Now, of course, when it comes to other workflows, the exact approach that we would take may vary depending on exactly what's happening and what's going on there. Someone once
It's a very real issue though. It's like, and it's good to be thinking about how you can test and improve before you actually just rip it out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of my developer friends once told me that everyone has a test environment. Some of us are just lucky enough to have it separate from production.
Oh.
Those are
Now,
the only questions we have
Okay.
okay.
right now. So thanks so much. We had somebody from our audience send in both of those. So thanks so
All
much.
right.
And
Yeah, thank you for the
back to you
questions.
guys. Yeah.
So if this is something that you're interested in having done for your MSP, by all means, head over to the Raven Automation website at ravenautomation.com or email our sales team at ravensales@ravenautomation.com. We've got two different plans available where we can implement these kinds of things for you. One, we have our quarterly momentum plan that'll get you 15 hours per quarter to get workflows such as this one built and implemented in your environment. It also includes workflow monitoring and maintenance, and it's a quarter-to-quarter term. On the other hand, we have a monthly version of this with our scaling plan at $3,500 a month that includes 15 hours per month to get workflows such as this built and implemented. It also includes workflow monitoring and maintenance, and that one runs on a 3-month term. So again, if you would like more information, head over to ravenautomation.com and you can book an appointment with us there or email ravensales@ravenautomation.com.
Yeah, and I would add that, if you saw something you thought was helpful and you're able to build it yourself, that's awesome. Go for it. That's great. If you'd like help or just having somebody like our team there to be a backup for your team or to help you get your backlog done, this is just one of the many, many automations that we've done in many areas of the business. The ROI can pretty off the charts. Whether you build it yourself or whether you partner up for it is really a really good question. But if you're looking for a partner, I hope you saw some of the quality work that we're doing and it makes sense, and you can see how there would be a lot of ROI and value in our help as well. So just bear in mind, it's not just that you're getting this; you're getting access to many other automations, and including tasking us to create new custom ones that maybe are novel or haven't been done before. So it's a really cool process, and we love helping people out. So,
Absolutely. And with that, we'll move to wrap up. I just want to say thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate you attending today. And if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to reach out. We would love to chat with you.
thanks everybody.
Thanks.